clock is ticking for me. I have 30 minutes to go through everything that's important about ad blocking and advertising, so quite a challenge in front of me. First of all, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the people at iAdvize for having me here. This is my second time in Nantes. My first time was in 2016. I was lucky enough to go speak at Web Today, which is just down the pier, and really enjoyed the city. I'm not just saying that because you all are here. I travel a lot. Some cities are good, and some cities are better, and some cities are not that good. This is definitely the better kind. I like being in Nantes quite a bit. What I'm here today to talk to you about is basically how you can get back an ad blocking audience. So many of you out there who may be marketers, maybe advertisers, you may assume that this ad blocking audience is gone, is irretrievable, is permanently out of your grasp. So what I want to do today is first of all go through a little, history of ad blocking. Including a portion at the beginning talking about what is wrong with ads. Now, I won't be making any headlines when I tell you some of the problems that are happening in advertising right now and some of those that continue to happen. But I hope to be able to tell you this whole story because unless you go through the entire thing, it doesn't make sense that we get to a place we're at in 2018 where ad blocking is actually something that has helped push the advertising industry into a better place, and where these ad blocking users are a very valuable and reachable segment that's very interesting for marketers. And I might point out one that makes up almost a quarter of the French online population. There are 24.5% of the French online population are using ad blockers. So, without further ado, what's wrong with ads? Anybody know? Lots of things, right? I'm not here to pile on and say, why all ads are bad. All ads aren't bad. But ads had a moment in 1994, on October 27th, actually, when they all started online. And from that moment, they started, the advertising industry sort of went in the wrong direction. It got bigger. There was this thing called data that started to happen. People started to collect a lot of data, too much. Pop-ups were born. By 1998, we were encountering words like banner blindness. People weren't even looking at the ads. And by 2002, as I'll show you in a second, people were actively blocking the ads. So this created this sort of unhealthy atmosphere where the users aren't paying attention to the ads, and the value of the ads is going way, way down. And so what's the answer to that? The easiest answer is, of course, more ads, more numerous ads, of course, and more intrusive ads that pop out at you, ads that pop under, ads that force you to watch them before you enter a website. This is where advertising went over the next couple of years. And obviously, then ad blocking came along, and now we're talking about, lots of people are talking about, how do we get ads to be better? But the other issue we're dealing with is we have some very new issues with ads, some things that just happened recently. For instance, my good buddy, Mark Zuckerberg, up there. I hope that's recognizable. One of our designers is going to be unhappy if it's not recognizable as Mark Zuckerberg. But so obviously we've all heard recently about what's going on with Cambridge Analytica and with Facebook. Actually, just yesterday, Christopher Wiley, as I'm sure many of you saw, sat before the American Congress and took questions. This is an ongoing saga. So what does this mean for ads? What does this mean for your everyday consumer? Well, it means that that everyday consumer is paying attention to the data that they're surrendering over to people like Facebook now. This is a new thing. People like me, people like many of you have probably been telling people about this for a long time, but most people didn't care. Most people weren't listening. They didn't know that, for instance, on PCMag.com, you're going to encounter 73 tracking vendors and 240 tracking tags. That's one impression of one page at one time. Little much, right? That's a tad much. And so we see that obviously legislation like GDPR has happened, and there's a bit of a pushback there. But I would argue that the bigger issue here, the bigger issue for marketing and the current state of it is not the regulation, but it's the narrative. People actually know the narrative now. They understand that if they are not paying for a service, They are the service. And that data is something that I think is going to continue to awaken more and more consumers in the next coming years. Another thing that is a new problem with advertising is cryptojacking. A nice little amalgam of words there. So you probably know what cryptojacking is, right? Yeah? So, but just a quick reminder session, maybe for those of you not so familiar with it. Cryptojacking is either one of two things. It started off as a website that would actually mine your computer CPU for cryptocurrency. And very soon after that, some of the ne'er-do-wells in and around the advertising world, they decided, oh, wait, I can take a perfectly good ad and inject it with JavaScript that will actually mine things from people's computers if they click on the ad or sometimes just scroll over the ad on the page. Well, naturally, this got people's attention. We introduced a particular filter for Adblock Plus where people could block these mining scripts from sites, and obviously we were blocking the ads. So there was a protection that consumers were getting for that, and consumers really responded positively to that. They said, oh my goodness, those ads out there aren't so innocent anymore. But this really, cryptojacking, is just another form of malvertising. Another amalgam, another combination mashup word. It seems to be a popular thing to do. Malvertising, as again, you all know, I'm not making headlines here, is when a perfectly good ad is injected surreptitiously with malware. So suddenly you're just minding your own business, you're on a website, and you roll over an ad, just looks like any other ad. The advertiser, the publisher, everyone behind that ad thinks it's just a normal ad. It's been served programmatically in milliseconds, but then suddenly there's malware in there because someone jumped into the open architecture of the web and the advertising landscape and took advantage of that and put malware in it. Malware increased from 2015 to 16 by 132.6%, according to Risk IQ. They're a very popular, very reputable security firm. That's a lot, and this got a lot of people's attention. In fact, among ad blockers, we usually are talking about a skew toward men. More men use ad blockers than women on average. But a study done by PageFair, they're an anti-ad blocking company, found that women were 38% more likely to download an ad blocker for security reasons than men were. So this idea that either through cryptojacking or through malvertising or something like that, that something's going to invade your computer seemed to open up new audiences for ad blocking. And basically, it all is summed up in this line. So we talked about before 1994, that's our very first ad ever online. Well, 2015 is the year that the IAB issued this mea culpa and said, we're sorry. We messed up. We lost track of the user experience. And I don't put that up there to rub their face in it. I think the IAB was doing everyone a favor when they said this because they were finally owning up to the fact that people needed to do better. And so this is just an example. This concludes the part about what's, what some of the issues that they're currently facing and have historically faced the advertising industry. But, of course, users already had the solution out there, right? 1 billion people now block ads. And it's very instructive, actually, that we had someone talking about the Asian market and the Chinese market right before I was on, because the majority of those users are actually not in France, not in Germany, not in North America, not in Africa, but in Asia. And they're using a little-known ad-blocking browser called UC Browser. UC Browser has hundreds of millions of users. And behind UC Browser is the very big company, Alibaba. Almost all of those users, 94% of the growth of mobile ad blocking has come in the Asia-Pacific region. And that is a very specific thing because people there, they use their phones, as we just learned, very differently and much more than maybe we do in France or maybe we do in Canada or the United States. We have about 100 million users. I would argue that all of those billion people, though, the first reason that they probably signed up for an ad blocker was because of one factor that we've seen since we were born in 2006 all the way up to now, and that doesn't change. This is a study by HubSpot. HubSpot's a marketing company. You probably know HubSpot, everybody. And it found that the number one and number two reasons, it's really just the same thing, right? Ads are annoying or intrusive. Ads disrupt what I'm doing. These are the main reasons that people download an ad blocker. Notice number 3 up there, security. It's coming up in the rankings. I think people are starting to understand that ads endanger their devices, and that's a legitimate reason for using an ad blocker. But the main reasons are the same that we've always seen, and it's just that there's a 30-second pre-roll on a YouTube video, and I have to go through all 30 seconds of that in order to get to a 20-second piece of content. That doesn't seem very equitable. And users obviously don't think so either. So now quickly I want to jump into the history of ad blocking. And I know that many of you may know this. I have to put this in every presentation. I think it's an exciting history, but it's one that has to be told in order to understand where we're at. And I promise at the end we're going to get to some positive news. So ad blocking started in 2002. The very first ad blocker is open source. It was called Adblock, and it was made by a Danish guy. This particular ad blocker was beautiful, as you can see. Look at the lovely UI there. The thing about this particular ad blocker is it was very hard to use. Users had to be able to write a little bit of code in order to even use the ad blocker. Obviously, that's fairly difficult, and it isolates your user base to a smaller core of tech users. That didn't change much a couple years later when someone took another approach. This was done by a German guy. We're staying in Europe, basically, for the history of ad blocking here. Done by a German guy, different approach. This is not necessarily open source. This is a product called WebWasher. But you can see by the UI and by all the gobbledygook up there that you had to be pretty well advanced as a user, a power user at least, if not understanding a little bit of code, to even be able to use it. What WebWasher did was instead of making you write the filters, it gave you the elements on the page, and it allowed you to pick the elements that you wanted to block on the page. Still really not something that's going to bust into the mainstream until 2006. And 2006 is when we came along. And this presentation is not about Adblock Plus. I just want to point that out. But historically, in the development of ad blocking, we did play a very big role. And I say we, but really it was just one guy. It was a guy named Vladimir Palant. He's my boss. He's the co-founder of Eyeo, the company behind Adblock Plus. And he wrote the original Adblock Plus code. Well, what made Vladimir's product so much better? Basically, he took the original code, that Danish guy's code, and he forked it, because it's open source, and he made it very user-friendly. No longer did you have to actually write filters, but you could actually just download Adblock Plus, and by default, it would be loaded with several ad filters that would filter out the majority of the ads online. So typical users, people like me, people like my parents, people who aren't developers, could just go to a site, download Adblock Plus. It would block all the ads out of the box, and voila, you have ad blocking. Ad blocking boomed. By 2009, Vladimir already had about 30 million users. By 2011, he was up to 45 million users. It was by far the #1 thing in the Mozilla's add-on store. At that time, Firefox, if you'll remember, was by far the most popular browser. Chrome wasn't around yet. And ad blocking really boomed. But a specific kind of ad blocking boomed. So it wasn't just Vladimir, it was others as well, who were making a certain type of ad blocking that I call scorched earth ad blocking. Anyone wager to guess what, scorched earth ad blocking is? It's basically complete ad blocking. It blocks everything and it leaves nothing in its path. This was the only game in town for a long time, but of those billion people who are blocking ads, what may surprise you is that the majority of them are now not blocking ads, but they're filtering ads. They're not doing scorched earth ad blocking anymore. That changed. Now, the majority of those billion people are blocking some of the ads and not blocking some of them. So we'll get into those differences here in a second, but this all started, the idea that you could filter ads and not block them, with a very simple insight. And it's just that people don't mind certain types of ads. in the history of ad development. Some were made, and they were made in a very respectable manner. Others were made that people found intrusive. And it turns out that study after study, including this one by HubSpot, found that people only want to block the annoying ones. We did a similar one with HubSpot one time, and we found that 83% of people just want to block the quote-unquote obnoxious ads. 77% of people want to filter ads, not just block them. So it seemed that there was something going on there. And Vladimir at the time, he felt these pangs of guilt, and he asked, because he saw, my product now has like 40 million users, so what am I going to do about that? I'm depriving publishers of basically the only form of revenue that they can have. And this, as it grows, may be a very dangerous thing. So he said, he asked our users, would you be okay with ads if they weren't so annoying? And the majority of our users, they said yes. In fact, 3/4 of our users said sure. If ads were just not annoying, we'd be fine with them. So back in 2011, we started running an experiment called acceptable ads. And it had users' approval behind it. Essentially, if your ads met certain criteria, you could, by default, have those ads whitelisted, and they would go through. Now, this was a controversial idea in 2011, and we lost a lot of users because of it, but not as many as you may have thought. It was a risky idea. We decided we're going to take this gamble because we think this is the better way to push the future of our product. We didn't even think about other people actually following our lead on this one, but it actually eventually happened, as we'll see. So what basically will happen under acceptable ads is that you have a certain experience. We'll see that there's some animation up there for a non-ad blocking user. But for those 24.5% of people in France, if they were using Adblock Plus, you would get a dramatically different experience. Smaller ads, there's not usually as many. This is a 2-and-2 comparison, but generally you wouldn't get as many, and they wouldn't be animated, they wouldn't pop up, things like that. Well, again, we took a risk by doing this because we told our users, look, if you think this is stupid, just opt out of it. Just say, sorry, I want to do scorched earth ad blocking. I want to block everything. The thing that surprised us is that few of our users did. So as acceptable ads went on, it became more and more sophisticated because we started to get very granular in our approach to it. Right now, the criteria for acceptable ads involve position of the ads, labeling, and size. And it gets all the way down to the pixel size on the page if you want to be considered for whitelisting. But we still had a big problem. And the problem was that we were ultimately the ones who had to make the final call on what was acceptable and what was not. We consulted with our users. We put every whitelisted ad in our forum. But at the end of the day, there was this issue that, well, what if you become corrupted at some point? So to solve that issue and also to encourage other ad blockers to join, we decided we can't decide what's good and bad, what's acceptable and not anymore. This has to be done by an acceptable or ads committee. And that's exactly what we did. We made the acceptable ads committee. We don't have a vote on the acceptable ads committee. The acceptable ads committee determines what is acceptable for acceptable ads. So they determine what criteria. If I go back a slide, they essentially determine all of these things. And because of that, because we got so many companies to take part, because so many people decided to be part of it, other ad blockers joined. In fact, Adblock, not Adblock Plus, they're different. They have 60 million users. We have 100 million users. They decided to join as well because it was independent, because no longer was Adblock Plus and Eyeo behind it, but this was something that had a lot of big companies behind it, and it also had a lot of nonprofits and professors and privacy researchers who were taking part in it. And ultimately what it led to was a trend, a motif that happened in ad blocking. And this is how people block ads now. Believe it or not, it's no longer scorched earth ad blocking, but what we see is ad filtering and an independent committee. That tends to be how ad blocking works these days. So you have filtering, not blocking, and an independent committee determines what is acceptable and what's not. And we were a tad bit proud of ourselves, I have to admit, when we saw that even one of the biggest digital company in the world with billions of dollars in revenue, Google, they followed this lead. So the Coalition for Better Ads, we've heard of the Coalition for Better Ads, right? Yeah? So the Coalition for Better Ads is a thank you, there, by the way. The Coalition for Better Ads is a cross-industry group. It includes the IAB, Facebook. It also includes Google. And the Coalition for Better Ads, they did a study of 55 ad types and determined which ones that were acceptable and which ones were not. And they happen to have Google as a member. So Google has Chrome, the biggest browser, and Google was able to actually enforce this standard. So they were able to say, okay, from out of the box, starting, it was just February of this year, ads are going to be filtered in Chrome. So if you're a Chrome user, you probably have this feature enabled. Now, it should be pointed out it's not the same as ad blocking. We were naturally a bit curious about what this might be. So we looked at the 55 ad types that they tested, and we found that they were only going to block 9 of those types. And that an Adblock Plus or an Adblock user or users of other ad blockers, they would be blocking 51. So it's not the same level of ad blocking, but it's still the same idea. Again, it's an independent committee determining what's okay and what's not, and it is filtering, not blocking. So with that, we're going to get to the meat of this in the last 10 minutes. Why is this audience so valuable? Why should you care about the 25% of people in France who are using ad blockers and the billion people in the world who are using ad blockers? Well, it's in a word, it's because they're so valuable. The slides that are going to come up next are all basically studies that we conducted or that Global Web Index, GWI, conducted. And they all show the value of ad blockers. The first thing is that you probably have this picture of an ad blocker as maybe someone like me who lives in a basement and doesn't ever come out of that basement and doesn't ever spend money online and hates all ads and probably, I don't know, doesn't have like a social security card, doesn't vote, etc. Au contraire, that is not an ad blocker. Ad blockers actually make a lot of money. What we found is they make as much or more than people who don't block ads. And by the way, all these slides are going to be comparing ad blockers to non-ad blockers. We also found that at an education level, they are more likely to have an advanced degree, a master's degree or a PhD, than their non-ad blocking friends. So they're highly educated. Again, we just talked about income level. They're making as much or more or in the higher income brackets than people who are not blocking ads. Surprising, right? Looks like that person, he comes out of his basement every now and again to go make money. But not only that, but they spend the money. And where do they spend it? Online. Ad blockers are way more likely to spend $250 or more dollars online per month than people who don't block ads. And not only do they spend money online, but they actually respond to advertisements. It's crazy, right? But it makes sense, because if you're an ad blocker, you're seeing not all the ads, just specific ones. So you, as an advertiser, you as a brand, you have one spot on a page, and you're the only thing being seen on that spot. It's like a full-page ad in a newspaper, and you're being seen by a young person who is highly educated, tech-savvy, and actually responds to that ad. They're almost twice as much more likely to say that they often respond to an ad than a non-ad blocker. So at the end of the day, what are ad blockers? They're valuable. They spend more money online. They're 80% more likely to make purchases online, and they're more likely to buy things after seeing an advertisement. So I'm not a marketer. I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. If I were a marketer, I would be like, I want Scrooge McDuck. I want that person. That person apparently isn't tooling around in their basement, making crypto mining scripts. This person is actually out there spending a lot of money. They're a valuable group. So 5 more minutes. What we got to do? I got to tell you what your options are to get this group. Now, I can't tell you your business. Again, not a marketer here, so I wouldn't presume to tell you how to do your job, but I can tell you the ways that you can reach this very, very valuable group. So the first thing you can do is defy users. I'm not a big fan of this one. Basically, this is the approach where you can hire a company. There are a couple of companies out there. One is called PageFair, I mentioned them before. One is called SourcePoint. Kind of dodgy players on the market, if I'm being honest. And they make kind of dodgy software that will allow you, as a publisher, for instance, to detect an ad blocker, and where that ad blocker has blocked an ad, to sneakily reinsert an ad there, right? So this is a tech solution. The problem is it's like a game of whack-a-mole, because the technology that they're developing is very easy for ad blockers to counter. And so as soon as the technology is working one day, suddenly another mole pops up in the whack-a-mole game, and the ad blocker is reblocking. Next day, they're doing it again. Day after that, it's the same. It's, to use another metaphor, it's a cat and mouse game. And the problem with it from an ideological standpoint is that it goes against the grain of the internet. Ad blockers wouldn't exist if, and neither would privacy blockers or anything like that, if users didn't control their own experience. This goes directly against the experience we have. Not the same as picking up a paper. That's a printed thing that you can't change or manipulate. But the internet, from the very day that it was born, was about exchanging information and user control. This goes against that. So that's why I think in this game of whack-a-mole, the ad blocking community, whether I'm involved with it or others are or not, will actually come out on top. Second, you can refuse entry. We've all seen these before, right? So you go to a site, you're using an ad blocker. Some of you use ad blockers out there? It's all right, your boss isn't looking. Using an ad blocker, you go to a site and they're like, boom, no, you're not allowed in here. You're using an ad blocker. I can tell that, go away. This happens on a lot of sites. I think my French is terrible. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that. But I think it's probably happening on a lot of French sites as well. This is fine. It's your right as a publisher to do that. If you want to engage your users that way, that's fine. But we've seen in some instances, for instance, in Bild.de, one of Germany's biggest sites, when they started doing this, they surrendered a lot of their readership. They lost their top rank in the Alexa German polls, and it was right after they put up a wall like this. So there are reasons maybe not to do this. But, again, it's your choice. Next one. Coalition for Better Ads. We talked about them before, right? So this is just revisiting that option. The Coalition for Better Ads, from a macro level, what they're trying to do is they're trying to take the non-ad blockers out there, so 75% of people in France, the majority, by far, and the ad blockers out there, and add them together. They're trying to put these two groups together, and the way that they're trying to do it is to make ads that are so good, or to reform the industry sort of from within, so that people won't need or want to use ad blockers anymore. Now, you may think that's masochistic for me to say that's a good idea. Maybe it is, but I think it's fine. And the reason is because it keeps the user in control of the situation. A user is still allowed to download an ad blocker, but the industry is going to try to reform itself. Why is that a bad idea? It's not. Finally, save the best for last, of course, the Acceptable Ads Committee. There are roughly 150 million people right now who are seeing acceptable ads. So they're using an ad blocker, which in some ways goes through the acceptable ad standard. Now that the acceptable ad standard is independent, more ad blockers are using it. And what it does is it recognizes that people probably will continue to use ad blockers, and it puts its money on the fact that you can reach those people, the very valuable audience, through an alternative experience. So essentially it says, okay, continue to use an ad blocker, but we're going to find something that even you, this very valuable ad block user, will find acceptable. So that is the last one, but to sum up, I think ads got issues, right? They've had issues for a long time. Things are getting better, but there are still lots of issues out there that threaten sort of the health of the ads world. Ad blocking solves a lot of users' issues. Users have known this for a long time. It's exactly why 1 billion of them use ad blockers. But the counterintuitive thing is that because ad blocking is so valuable and because most people are actually filtering ads and allowing an independent committee or a subgroup to determine what's acceptable and what's not, it actually solves a lot of the publishers' issues as well. Now, we're not in a place right now where everything is perfect. We've been sued 6 times in Germany. You may have heard that. We just won against Axel Springer, so hooray, in the German Supreme Court. So things are not exactly all perfect in the ads world, but I think that ad blockers and the entire community of advertisers are on their way to making things better. And I'm right at 30 minutes, so thank you very much, Nant.